serious? People in the adult entertainment industry. What was your first day on the job like? A bit intimidating, but not really much different. If anything, I had a little better of an idea of what I was doing compared to working at Starbucks. Was a stripper in my late teens. First day I was nervous as fuck. Some drunk dude walks up to the stage waving a dollar bill and said, "Slap your ass, I'll give you $1." Oddly enough, that made me somehow more comfortable with the whole thing. I actually enjoyed it and wasn't half bad. Made more money, legally, from 17 to 20 than any other job I had until like 2 years ago. I'm 37 now. Stripped briefly to pay for a semester's worth of tuition and books. On my first day, a lady shouted, "Whip out your pecker!" And I couldn't help but to laugh from both nerves and the fact she said, "pecker." After that, the rest seemed pretty easy. Escort in a brothel. Edit. Escort is a commonly used synonym for all the other words for full-service sex worker where I'm from, making a note as there has been some confusion. Honestly, my first day was a mixed bag. The other girl I worked with was hilarious and properly took me under her wing and fed me a glass of wine before my first John to settle my nerves. I haven't drank on the job since that day, but that one drink really helped. I got tipped by one client, assaulted by another. When I was assaulted, though, the other worker, the receptionist, and my boss all had my back and gave him a proper telling off and barred him. This was a one-off, it hasn't happened since. I've never felt safer in any other job, and I have more control. I walked home that day with more money than I'd earn in a week in my last job. I've never looked back. I'm long retired now, but I was 21 at the time and at a loose end, new city and no job, so decided to work at a gentleman's club as a prostitute. I'd done my research and been in for an interview, so I was feeling confident and relaxed. No one else showed up on time, so I was the only girl there on the day shift and sat chatting to the receptionists. My first client was a really good-looking English Sri Lankan guy who was really sweet and equally nervous. We both couldn't believe it was the other's first time until we were both fumbling and laughing trying to put a condom on correctly. I can't remember who else I saw that day, but I do remember getting paid more than I had earned in a week working 2 jobs. I ended up working for around 7 years and really enjoyed it. I started as a waitress in a strip club. 3 months later, I tried dancing. My first time in the VIP, where I had been seeing the workflow for 3 months, so I knew what to say and where to go. But my hands were shaking. The guy even asked me if I was okay. After that first hour, it was fine, but my body literally was shaking in the beginning. I didn't feel scared, though. It was a natural reaction. Former exotic dancer of 3 years. The first night was intimidating in part because the other dancers are generally hostile toward new girls. That may have just been the case at that club, I'm not sure. But also because the job itself is so heavily stigmatized that you find yourself afraid that somebody you know will see you. That faded after a few weeks, though, and it was actually a really fun job. You should always be careful not to fall into the lifestyle, though. Keep work and personal lives separate. 6.9K, dare I say, nice. Double edit. 6.9 was a 69 reference, hence the nice. Didn't mean to confuse anybody, sorry. Terrifying. I was 21 years old and had never even stepped foot inside a strip club. I had bought a matching bra and underwear set from Marshall's along with regular heels. Big mistake. I was told to watch the dancer before me on stage, who of course was gorgeous and clearly knew what she was doing. I went up there and immediately busted my ass because of the normal-sized heels. The rest of the time was just spent holding onto the pole for dear life and hoping I wouldn't get fired for being the worst dancer they'd ever witnessed. I wasn't fired and eventually got the hang of everything, but I still cringe at how awful those first initial days were. Former male stripper here. It was awesome. It was comedic, sexy and fun. Just an absolute party. The crowd had a blast. We quintuple lap danced the bachelorettes. It didn't pay much, but I wasn't really in it for the money. I would totally start another show if I can make it happen. I only had 2 brief, uncomfortable moments that night. First, an old woman just grabbed my goodies. Second, another old woman shoved $1 so far between my cheeks that I didn't see it until after the show. I'm well out of it now for a good many years, but when I was 16 and homeless, an older gentleman offered me a serious chunk of money for a weekend. He thought I was 14. I was hunger skinny, so it was believable. He had a hotel room, bought me some clean clothes and makeup, and left me alone for a few hours to get the street off of me. When he got back, he threw out my old clothes and took me to dinner. I spent 3 days with him, and none of it was terrible. I wasn't living my best life at the time, so the bar was pretty low. He was polite to me and wasn't rough. He let me drink in the evenings, but never let me get drunk or high, and had me call him Dad in public. He told me it was because it would look odd otherwise, but I called him a normal name that I'm sure wasn't his real name when we were alone, so it didn't feel particularly predatory. I never told him my name, so he called me Anna. We went out during the days, sometimes to eat or shop, once to the zoo, and sometimes I'd stay at the hotel while he went out. He didn't tell me much about himself and his life, lots of old anecdotes from his younger years and silly stories. He liked me to tell him about my life, stupid teenage garbage about my friends and parents, what kinds of things I liked and why. When we parted, he gave me a bit of cash, but used most of the money we agreed on to get me a motel room for a month. He talked about being worried about how I was living. Beyond the money I earned, he spent a bunch on groceries and toiletries that I didn't see until after he left, so I couldn't thank him. But I felt more cared for by this stranger who paid an underage girl for sex than anybody else in my life. He also extended my stay with management for another 2 weeks. The owner came to my door and told me not to check out yet. Having a room with a lock helped me hugely. I wasn't being robbed anymore, so I could work small jobs and hide cash. And I didn't have to worry about the violence I was trying to avoid before. And I wasn't taking drugs every day because my life didn't disgust me. When my stay ended, I was able to move into a group home and live a bit cleaner and safer, and never did the streets thing again. I did plenty of drugs and drinking, but just for fun and with friends, not to stay warm or stay awake. For context, this was in Canada and was very illegal. Edit. Thanks for the gold. It's never happened before. I don't know what to do. Terrifying. My rent was due soon and I felt there was no other option, so I went straight to Craigslist offering sex. I was well aware of the possibility that I could be putting myself in serious danger, but at the time, getting my rent in on time was my only worry. I was advertising in a murder capital city. I hated it. I hated every man I encountered in sex work afterward, and I try not to think about that time in my life. I assumed that because I was already very promiscuous and used to having sex with strangers that it wouldn't be so bad, but it's so much worse when you can't be picky. There's a reason those kind of men pay for sex. They tend to be creepy and unattractive to the point that buying sex is the only way they can get a woman to look at them. I'm sure I'll get downvoted. Reddit hates when I talk shit about prostitution because everyone has this wonderful, idealized picture of it in their heads, while I spent years drinking heavily just to get the images out of my own head. I ended up going to trade school, and I now have a well-paying, exciting career in factory labor. But I wouldn't trade it for any kind of sex work. I actually enjoy my job. And I get to gladly tell any man that tries hitting on me there to go fuck yourself with an airline. Edit. Removed the news story because it is identifying. Thank you to all those who have given me awards. Also, I understand the flack I'm getting for calling these men unattractive. I have had wonderful, consensual, satisfying sex with many traditionally unattractive men. However, I have no love for my former clients, who I found ugly inside and out. Dancer here. I remember being chill and excited about it. This was 20 years ago. The next few times were a little more nerve-wracking because what does an 18-year-old have to say to middle-aged men, you know? Took me a while to get comfortable. Now I'm a pro and can't wait till the clubs open again. I knew what it would be like going into it. I'd been working for the agency for a few months as a driver, taking the girls to their appointments, making sure they didn't get robber or killed. My boss mentioned that he had had some interest from females wanting a male escort. I'd seen Deuce Bigelow. I figured, why the hell not? I was 18, and I cleaned up pretty nice. My first client was a woman in her late 30s. Not a supermodel, but not unattractive at all. She was in town for some auto parts convention and wanted someone to show her around. We wound up sleeping together after. I got my money and left the next morning. I did that until I moved out of state 3 years later. I'm 21 and was an oil wrestler for a short time just last year, and I was terrified. I had no practice or was shown anything. I made $10 in tips that night, but as it went on for the next 3 weeks, I began making more. The girls were really cliquey and at times total bitches. The men we entertained were disgusting low-hygiene cowboys and rude as fuck. Not my scene, but nothing but respect for the women who are able to have fun in that environment. It was liberating. I was nervous at first, but all smiles afterward. Being a guy, I probably had different experiences. I was awkward-looking even through my early 20s. I decided to become a rent boy when I realized there was a certain subsect of older gay gentlemen who appreciated the way I had aged and carried myself. I did it for about a year or so until I met my husband. All in all, I made some money and walked away feeling better about myself. First job in the industry was a sexting operator for a dating website. I found out it was a scam. I was basically a bot and never got paid for talking to people, lol. They owe me at least $120. I hope their site is exposed one day. Edit. First day was weird. I had to cater to a bunch of random guys. There was no training, just thrown into random chats with random guys. I basically made up nonsense to keep the convo going so they could buy more credits to make the website rich while we get nothing. I was basically the person that was like, "Don't you like talking to me? Why won't you buy more credits then?" Edit 2. Oh, I also forgot to mention. I remember feeling really weird the first day because as bots we had access to a bunch of random women's nudes. They looked like amateur porn stars or something, but I remember being like, who are these women? It just felt wrong. Started at 19. Boyfriend of 3 years dumped me, so I moved to another city and become a hooker. Very first night on the job. It was a quiet night. Didn't get any jobs. My boss, an older man, took me upstairs to one of the rooms, pushed me down onto the bed, and stuck his tongue down my throat. When I told him to stop and that I don't think we should be doing it, he said that I need to get comfortable working eventually. I think he felt bad because he gave me $100 and sent me back downstairs. The next day I had 2 jobs. The first one, my actual first full-service job ever, the dude was so high on coke he came before I even touched him. The second job was the exact same, except we got far enough to put the condom on that time. I was like, damn, I hope it's all going to be that easy. It definitely is not always that easy, but I love it. Edit. I'm being told coke doesn't work that way. I'm sorry, he did it in the room and I saw him do it, so I just assumed that was an affect of it. Sorry for being dumb about it. I was 18 and naive. My first client chose me because I was new. Fresh meat. He was a regular at the club. I was terrified but went along with it. He made me call him Daddy, and every time he pushed into me, I winced from pain. He secretly took the condom off. The manager or girl who gave me an introduction tour never warned me of clients trying to take off condoms. I couldn't tell management about him since he was a regular at the club. They also never told me there was an emergency button to leave the room if I needed to. I only learned 3 years later when a client beat me. That's when I decided it was my last day. I was kicked out, or left on my own. It's complicated. At 19. I saw the writing on the wall and needed money fast, so I started as a stripper at 18. The Great Recession happened a few years later, and so I moved to escorting at 22. First job as a dancer was with 2 other girls to a private party. I had something of a debut, and while I had no idea what I was doing, I had my heels on and I knew how to shake my butt. I had literally $200 in singles just rained on top of me. 30 minutes of work. Who knew how much the other girls made? But I was hooked. The economy took a huge downturn a few years later, and so many of my regular hot times were not as prolific. I only worked on call, private parties, bachelor parties, rush week, etc., as I wanted to stay out of a fixed location due. But this would up hurting me in the long run. I turned to escorting through an agency who actually was pretty kind, and I'm still amazed I never had to audition for any of my agencies. He set me up with a John, who was an utter gentleman, kind and considerate, explained his side of things in a way that made sense, and helped me find peace and less of a sense of guilt about what I was doing. I saw him a couple of times, but I think after that my novelty wore off, which is fine. Every once in a while my thoughts float to him and his beautiful golden retrievers. I hope he's living a good life somewhere. I'm pretty sure my life would have went a different way without those two experiences. And don't get me wrong, I've had plenty of just raunchy, awful, ungodly, unforgivable things done and said to me in my career for the sake of rent. But holding on to the few bright moments I had helped me make it through to financial and familial freedom, as well as retirement from the industry. When I started, I was at an agency, so I didn't get to screen people myself or have as much of a role in who I decided to see. My first client was this super quiet, gentle old Asian guy who just wanted a slow blowjob by a pretty girl. Easy peasy. My second client was a completely covered in freckles dude who booked 2 hours and took a Viagra and literally wanted to have crazy hard-pounding sex the whole time. I didn't really know enough to assert myself and be like, nah, brah. But holy shit, I was so worried after that appointment that I'd have to do sessions like that regularly. Thankfully, I've only seen one other person like that, and I wasn't willing to do that the full session. So we parted ways after that appointment, as I knew we weren't a good match. My third client was a super anxious and quiet tech guy who was really nerdy, and I eventually drew that out, and we bonded over it, and he was much more comfortable after that. Most of my friends are nerds since I grew up as a huge nerd, so that was totally in my wheelhouse, and awkward tech nerds have become some of my main bread and butter. I hope I'm helping them be less awkward and more confident over time with other women, and not just myself, but I know for sure I'm helping them get better in bed at least. This was a much more reassuring appointment than Viagra Dude, and I was hoping more appointments would be like that. Fourth client was a super old dude who retired from finance and got a farm, and apparently works his farm every day and had super strong hands and mainly spent the whole session giving me a massage and thanking me for the work that I do. It was so incredibly wholesome and lovely. He also had one of the biggest dicks I've ever seen. Last client ended up being the most representative of what my typical sessions look like and was a nice end to the day. Overall, the whole day put together gave me a nice range of what I might encounter in the industry. ICAM. My first time doing it, something happened and my stream was shown on a lot of different places and I had almost 1,000 people show up. I was terrified going into it, but once the money started to get rolling, it felt a lot more natural. Well, I'd like to start by saying, I used to be a male escort at age 15. I looked way older than I was. My first day was a little awkward, but that's because at the time, I was mute. I put up a flyer on Craigslist saying I was a young male mute escort and that I'd message my rates. At first, I was scared. But not because it was my first time. I'm just a very shy introvert. When I got my first message, it was from a much older woman. She looked to be around 50. I told her my rates and we talked about what was going to happen. She was sweet and caring, but she was one of those people you could just tell was lonely. Later that night, I got dressed. We met up at a hotel she had paid for, and we had sex. After that, though, for the rest of the time, we just cuddled, and she talked to me about her day, what's going on in her life, etc. And I just listened. So, all in all, my first day wasn't really bad. I just ended up being more shy than I had wanted to be. The first time ever escorting was not like I planned on. I'm gonna do this. I was propositioned at a club where I was dancing. I couldn't make it in a strip club, was not making more than $100 to $300 a shift, and every girl would brag about making $1,000 to $2,000. I'm like, WTF is wrong, W me. But I needed the deposit for my house and took him up on it. I look back and think, wow, I can't believe he even paid me that much, because I was definitely grossed out and unenthusiastic. I was a dancer in my college years. I was so nervous not because of the dancing, but because I was afraid I didn't look as good as the other girls. They wouldn't like me. It turns out they were so sweet and so diverse. One of my co-workers had 5 young kids. One of them was a PhD candidate at one of the local universities. One of them loved to bake in her spare time. Sharing small details like that about our lives made us grow together. Most of the regulars that came in were your average guys. Nothing weird or creepy. Eventually, when you got to know them enough, they would talk about things that stressed them out, like their debt or their job, or my 13-year-old daughter is smoking IDK, what to do, and you'd be more of a listener and advice giver instead of a sexual being. Not the same, but I met someone on a sugar daddy site since I was looking to be with someone who was in more finances than I. I ended up a survivor of repeated sexual assault, so not great. Edit. I have been working with Baltimore police for well over a year, and I believe he was a plant of a trafficking ring. 2 weeks ago, I got the call that the prosecutor will not be charging him. I have had a few trolls come for me. That's fine. I understand some people don't understand emotions and are rather sociopathic like that. But if I can help save another young person, it is worth it. I make TikTok videos about the dangers of online dating and have hundreds of thousands of views from them. People are dangerous, and the vulnerable do get preyed upon. And no cutesy little edgelord comment about deserving a pee and abuse will ever scare me or hurt me like my abuser did. In my early 20s, I did some escorting, gigolo work. I was afraid at what type of women would be willing to pay for sex, and my first client was exactly what I expected. Luckily, she didn't want me to do anything to her and just wanted to give me a blowjob while I fingered her asshole. She was amazing at it, BTW. My second client that day, however, wow. She was a legit 8 out of 10. She was a taller, 20-pound heavier version of Maria Menounos. You name it, she wanted to do it. She actually ended up being a repeat customer. Numerous times we would get together, and when all was said and done, was my best and most frequent client. She was extremely wealthy and just loved the idea of paying a man other than her husband to do the things we were doing. I did phone sex for a bit, and the first day was awkward. I felt like I was in a corny porno from the 80s. There were also a surprisingly high number of men that asked which area I lived in and were weirdly insisting on knowing. I'm guessing BC it was over the phone, it felt more real to them. After a couple of hours, I got into my role, and moaning like a bad actress became easier and funnier, but the first hours definitely felt awkward. My first porn shoot was fine. I went in, I'd paid a makeup artist, so I got that done first. I shot 2 solo scenes, got my money, and went home. Then I ate fried chicken because I'd been fasting. It was amazing. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to give it a like and subscribe for more stories like these. And of course, we'd love to hear your thoughts, so drop a comment below and share your experiences or opinions. See you in the next one.